Okay, I've been looking at the Pharisees in a study for a little over a month now, and they're quite interesting people. Um, Pardon? Better? Good. I got two mics on. Again, I will take a look a little bit at them historically. Pharisees came about after the Babylonian exile. Babylon had conquered them and taken most of the living Jews off to Babylon and left a remnant amount still in the area of Judea. And after several administrations of the Babylonian Empire, then came the Medo-Persians, who conquered the Babylonians. The Persians were, once their administration came in and the Medes had sort of faded into the background, the Persians were a little more compliant with the Jews' wishes. Daniel had survived through all of those administrations and had come in favor, and he was a strong proponent of Israel going back, or the Jews going back and being allowed to rebuild the temple. The Persians allowed that. So a few of the Jews return and are permitted to stay there and to worship in their temple, the place that they feel there is the only place they're allowed to worship in Jerusalem. But no royalty was allowed. The Persians were strong on that fact that we'll let you go back, but you're not to set up your own government. You still live under our government. Shortly after that happened, the Greeks conquered the Persians. And the Greeks came in and they allowed the Jews to do a little bit of their self-government. After all, it was part of their culture. They had developed the idea of a Senate where people went and discussed ideas and spoke their philosophy and then made decisions on what they would do. So they allowed a little bit of that to happen. And you remember there were three generals that were given the different areas to command after Alexander the Great had passed. And the first one that ruled over the Jewish area was the Ptolemies. They really pushed their culture on the Jews. And even though the Jewish people, after they returned to the temple, committed to remaining strong, things started to slide, as we've seen throughout history that did happen. Soon the Seleucids took over from the Ptolemies after that general had passed away, and they took a different tack. They decided they were going to impose harsh restrictions, and they committed basically religious atrocities against the Jewish nation. This left the Jewish nation in quite a turmoil, and in the Apocrypha we can read about the Maccabees, who were zealots that basically revolted, rose up, struck against the Greeks, and for a brief period were an independent nation. The Jews were free from Greek, Persian, and any other government. It was a very brief period. Soon the Romans came in and conquered the Greeks, and subsequently the independent nation was under Roman rule. The Romans offered a little bit of different approach, and they basically let Herod be the king. It's for the government side of things. Even though he was king, he really didn't rule. What the Romans said had to happen, had to happen. The Sanhedrin was to guide the religious direction of the country. Herod was to drive the administrative, governmental side of the country. At that time, all the Jews believed in three non-negotiables: the law of Moses, the Torah. There was also the Talmud, which some believed in and some did not. Some followed, some did not. That there was only one temple from which they could worship. That was the temple in Jerusalem. And they believed in the circumcision of all males And even though there were other societies at that time that followed that practice, the Jews were the only ones who believed it was a holy obligation, and that's why it was followed. It was not for personal hygiene or any other reasons that might have been given by other countries in the area. Out of that developed two religious followings, two sects or sections. The Pharisees, the subject of this discussion, and the Sadducees. There were pretty strong differences between the two, and that's why they were in such opposition within the Sanhedrin. Economically, the Pharisees were middle class. Economically, the Sadducees tended to be upper class, the richer ones. The root word far, from which Pharisees comes from, means to be divided or separated. They believed that they were separated from the other nations, but it actually grew into a belief that they were separated from the rest of the Jewish nation and that they were above them. The Sadducees claimed to be descendants of Zadok. Zadok was the priest during the reign of David and Solomon, and they claimed to be descendants, so therefore they believe that they are a priestly class. We spell Zadok Z-A-D-O-K. There are several different ways to spell it. As we change over the years as how things should be spelled, but the Sadducees came from Sadok, and that's how they developed that as their derivative of that name. The Pharisees believed that holiness could be achieved outside of the temple, that if you didn't live close enough to be to the temple, there were still ways you could achieve holiness and purity. The Sadducees believed that the only possible way for holiness was through temple ritual, through the sacrifice within the temple, through the other rituals that were followed there. The Pharisees developed a Talmud, which contained a lot of previously just oral law that they wrote down, so it's not really oral anymore, but it's the oral law that pre-existed them that they decided needed to be written down in their traditions. And they used that in conjunction with the Torah. Sadducees believe that the Talmud was not to be believed, not to be followed, and was made up stuff from the other guys. The Pharisees believed that resurrection and afterlife were possible. Sadducees believed that there was no way that resurrection, afterlife, or any type of spirit was possible. Continuing on till the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, the Pharisees helped to develop the rabbinic Judaism, which is what is practiced today. As the temple was destroyed and the people dispersed, and they got into different countries, including Spain and Germany and Russia, and they spread out over Europe and actually through Africa and Asia, there needed to be a way to worship. And so what they developed was considered rabbinic or rabbi-led Judaism. This stood strongly on the Talmud tradition. In fact, anybody in here see the movie Fiddler on the Roof? Yeah. Okay. Remember the song Tradition? Okay, it was a struggle he was going through at the time about his daughter wanting to break with tradition, Jewish tradition, and to go a different direction in her life. And he was wrestling with, do I follow tradition? What's tradition value? Tradition is very big in the Jewish religion today, and you hear on TV that's portrayed when you have a story about a Jewish family and their struggle with that, but we do this because of tradition. After 70 AD, there's no record or evidence of the existence of the Sadducees. The traditional joke, using tradition again, is that when the temple was destroyed, it destroyed their beliefs, and therefore they were Sadducees. But it really, if you believe that the temple was necessary for holiness and your temple's destroyed, you're not standing on very firm ground. And consequently, that is why they disappeared at that point. A few more facts on the Pharisees, and I'll get into the meat of this, but they weren't mentioned in the Old Testament. There's no mention of a Sadducee anywhere all the way up through the end of the Old Testament. They first start appearing in writings outside the Bible about 150 BC. Their belief was that they could achieve holiness through personal piety, through Jewish law, temple sacrifice, table purity, which today is known as kosher. Kosher foods are part of that table purity, the Torah study, and fasting. And Christ talks a little bit about some of those things and how they fast for others to see that they're fasting, and a few other things that they do that are more ceremonial than have real meat to them, at least in the situation with the Pharisees. The Pharisees supported Herodian rule. They used it to their advantage, as in the case of Christ, wherever that was possible. And the Romans and the Herodians often sought the favor of the Pharisees during the life of Christ. Later that became sort of, they realized that there were too many things going on and they couldn't continue to try to do that, hence later on the destruction of the temple. I'm going to shut this down now. What got me going on this was who they were and what they did was my readings regarding Christ's interaction with the Pharisees. Obviously, the Sadducees and the scribes sort of fall into the same category, but there were differences between the Sadducees and the Pharisees, as I've tried to show there. And there seemed to be more of an impact with the Pharisees. Part of that is during Christ's time on earth, the Pharisees were in power in the Sanhedrin. They were the majority. By the time Acts rolls around, the Pharisees have come out of favor, and there are more Sadducees in the Sanhedrin than there were Pharisees. So there's a political power type struggle that goes on there in the background behind all of this. But where I got started into this is basically in chapter 15 of Luke. And I'd like to read a little bit about that from you. There are three parables that are given here, and I'll go quickly over the first two. The interesting thing is that Pharisees saw shepherds as lowly people. Part of that separation is they were above them. They were above tanners. They were above anybody who worked with the dead. Shepherds were one of the classes of people that they saw as lowly and beneath them. Tax collectors were another. And in this instance, Christ is eating with taxpayers and what's termed sinners. Reading from 15. Then all the tax collectors and the sinners drew near to him to hear. And the Pharisees and scribes complained, saying, "This man receives sinners and eats with them." So he spoke this parable to them, saying, "What man of you, having 100 sheep, if he loses one, does not leave the 99 in the wilderness and go after the one which is lost until he finds it?" So he's taking people that believe that they are heads and tails above sheep, and he's telling them in this parable, "You're a shepherd. I want you to think like a shepherd as I propose this story to you." So he's using a story about shepherds to teach the people who deride and demean shepherds. "And when he has found it, he lays it on his shoulders, rejoicing. And when he comes home, he calls together his friends and neighbors, saying to them, 'Rejoice with me, for I found my sheep, which was lost.' I say to you that likewise there is no more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 just persons who need no repentance." Again, his audience here are Pharisees, those that see themselves way up there, and he's talking to them and basically in the story bringing them down to the earthly level. He continues on. One of the other things he did is he spoke in chapter 16 about the Pharisees' love of money. So the second parable is about money. Or what woman having 10 silver coins, if she loses one coin, does not light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? And when she has found it, she calls her friends and neighbors together, saying, "Rejoice for me, for I have found the piece which I lost." Likewise, I say to you, there is joy in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents. Similar theme here between the two different lost items, two different examples that are really directed right at the heart of the Pharisees. I think probably reading the crowd, he realized I still don't have these guys' attention. And so he goes into the third one. Some Bibles will print a title over this, the parable of the prodigal son. Some talk about it as the parable of the lost son. I prefer the parable of the lost son because what prodigal means is that the wasteful spending, that's what it's about. I had to look that up because I couldn't understand how prodigal and prodigy connected. They don't. Prodigy, a child prodigy, is someone who's gifted and has a high level of talent. So I was struggling with how does a prodigal son fit with this? Well, prodigal means wasteful spending. In this case, that's one of the problems of this son, but in effect, the true story we need to focus on is this is the lost son. In this parable, Jesus is using the lost son as the sinner, in general, the sinner. The Father is our Father, and very specifically, the older brother that's portrayed in here are the Pharisees. And he's trying to get them to see the theme behind this. Going through that, verse 11. Then he said, a certain man had 2 sons, and the younger of them said to his father, "Father, give me the portion of goods that falls to me." So he divided to them his livelihood. Okay. At this time, the oldest son was due the bulk of the father's belongings after he passed. The second son was due a third. But it was considered an insult to ask for that before your father had passed. Say, I don't want to wait around with you till you pass. I want what's coming to me now. Within the Jewish culture, that was a grave insult. Continuing on, and not many days after, the younger son gathered all together, journeyed to a far country, and there wasted his possessions with prodigal living. That wasn't genius living, that was wasteful spending. In effect, he threw away his fortune. The other point here, I think, that's important when you look at this as the older son or the younger son being the sinner, is that he decided to go far away. He wanted distance, and he basically wanted distance between him and his father, so he could move away and not be within his father's purview without seeing his father, thinking he could be out of his father's sight and out of his father's care. But when he had spent all, there arose a severe famine in the land, and he began to be in want. Then he went and joined himself to a citizen of that country, and he sent him into the fields to feed swine. Okay. In this case, being a citizen of a different country means he joined himself in service to a Gentile. Again, how low can you go? You know, the Jews believed they were up here. The Pharisees thought they were a little higher. Jews, and then bottom strata was Gentiles. And here's the son of this successful man in the theme of this, God, sinking to the lowest possible level. Continuing on in verse 16, and he would gladly have filled his stomach with the pods that the swine ate, and no one gave him anything. So even below being a Gentile, It's someone who's in service to a Gentile who's tasked with feeding swine. Not much lower can you go. And in such want that the food that he gave to the swine would have been a good meal for him. And he had no one to turn to. There was no place for him to go. Nobody would give him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have bread enough and to spare? And I perish with hunger. It says here, he came to himself. He's confronted himself. He's confronted his sin. And he's realizing how low he's fallen. He realizes that being a servant, in this case a servant to God, would be better than what he's put himself into. Continuing on, I will arise and go to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. That's really a key here. This is showing you, this is about a sinner in general. It's portrayed as a story about a son, but just that. Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. It's a son that's repentant, a sinner that wants to come home. And I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. This is what he's saying to himself. He hasn't said this to his father yet, but this is his mental process he's going through, his heartfelt process he's going through in regards to his situation and what he's decided to do. So he's got both a heartfelt and a mental process that says, I need to repent. And he arose and came to his father. But when he was still a great way off, his father saw him and had compassion and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. Okay. The father's looking for him. This wasn't he got to the front door and knocked. He was a long way off, and the father was looking for him to come back. Obviously, this father is our father. This is a father that wants us back, that wants us to be with him, that wants a relationship with us. And we have a choice to reject that and to walk away, or to come back if we choose to do that, or to stay away. Continuing on again. And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight, and am no longer worthy to be called your son. Father cuts him off at that point. He didn't go on about being a servant. He didn't go on about, I would be better be a servant than where I was at. Father doesn't wait for him to go through that. But the father said to his servants, bring out the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet. Bring out the things of honor. A robe, a ring, the sandals. These were all things of authority and honor. And the father's putting his son right back where he was before he left. And bring the fatted calf here and kill it, and let us eat and be merry. Fatted calf. That was, in Jewish tradition, a calf that had been fed extra, not in hopes that it would grow faster, but in preparation for a celebration. The father was looking for the son to come back. The father was preparing for a celebration. And all the son had to do was to come back in repentance. Now the older son, I'm sorry, did I skip a sentence? Yes, I did. And let us eat and be merry. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found, and they began to be merry. So the celebration has begun. But the important part there is the father sees that his son was as dead. He was dead in sin. He's lost and is now found. He's returned to me. The son I value has come back. The sinner I value has returned to me. Now his older son was in the field, and as he came and drew near to the house, he heard music and dancing. Now I don't know how you hear dancing, But I gotta believe there were feet that were pounding pretty hard on the floor or something or other here to give him an indication of what was going on. So he called one of the servants and asked what these things meant. He left, went to do some work, and when he comes home, there's a celebration before he's there that started without him. And he says to him, the servant, and he says to him, your brother has come, and because he has received him safely, or safe and sound, your father has killed the fatted calf. But he was angry, and would not go in. Therefore his father came out and pleaded with him. Okay. When the first time I read this, my thought was, I can sort of understand that guy. You know, he's worked hard every day to do what he was supposed to do. I think the language that's used here, though, is more indicative of what's going on than maybe just the actions here. And I think we need to look at that a little more deeply. Therefore his father came out and pleaded with him. So he answered and said to his father, lo, these many years I have been serving you. I never transgressed your commandment at any time, and you never gave me a goat that I might make merry with my friends. Okay. He's using the type of language that would be between a servant and a master. Servant, a slave, and a master. He's not talking about what he did out of love. He's not talking about what he did because he knew it was the right thing and it was what the Father wanted, or fruits of the Spirit. He says, I have been serving you. Does God need our service? Not really. He created everything. He could create whatever we think we can do for. He wants our service, but God doesn't need us or anything we do when you really get down to it. I never transgressed your commandment at any time. How many of you believe that? He's basically saying I'm sinless, which we know is not realistic. And you never gave me a goat that I might make merry with my friends. He's not looking for a relationship with his father. He didn't say, you never gave me even a goat, not a fatted calf, but you never gave me so much as a goat that I might celebrate away from you and with my friends. So he's indicating what's really important, what's on his heart. He doesn't want a relationship with God, his Father. He's looking for a relationship where he can celebrate with others. So we're starting to get a real picture of where this heart is. That as soon as this son of yours, sounds a little bit like Adam, doesn't it? That woman you gave me, here it's, as soon as this son of yours, who has devoured your livelihood with harlots, you killed the fatted calf for him. In other words, you're treating him better than you treated me. And we really don't know what the son wasted his money on, but the older sons, as he's already probably exaggerated, he's never transgressed, that he's always followed the command, that he's always served, is now saying what he thinks his brother was doing when he was away from them. And he, the father, said to him, son, you are always with me, and all I have is yours. It was right that we should make merry and be glad, for your brother was dead and is alive again, and was lost and is found. We don't get any more than that. We don't know. The parable doesn't go beyond that and tell us that the older son repented or the older son took his money and left or whatever happened here. And I think that's sort of up to us to think about. The big difference here is we're looking at what's pointed at the Pharisees, in that God wanted a relationship with them, and what they wanted was just to be able to follow the law. Pharisees were known for building fences around the law. And an example of that is it was unlawful, it was against the law for a Jew to harvest on the Sabbath. The law made by the Pharisees was you're not allowed to walk through a field of wheat on the Sabbath. For if your shoe would grab a grain and pull it off of a stalk of wheat, you would be in violation and you would be harvesting. The thing they missed is what's in the person's heart. That wasn't their intent, and that was accidental. Christ was looking at the heart, and they were missing the point. They missed that he wanted a relationship with them. They were missing that they were so close and yet so far. Sometimes when we look at situations, we talk about works and the fruit of the Spirit. This really is an example of that and how it breaks down. If we're doing what we're doing because it's what we're supposed to be and it's part of the law, but we're not doing it out of love, we're not working in that relationship. And I'll be the first to raise my hand and say, I struggle with relationships. I think, I'm going to be stereotypical here, guys struggle more with that than women. Women are the loving mother. They do so much of what they do out of love. Guys get up in the morning and go to work and do their job. They may hate it, but it's what they do. They have an obligation. So things tend to get to a point where you don't think about the job, you just start going through it. You just keep doing it. My wife made a comment that my mother raised me right because she hasn't had to pick up my dirty clothes off the floor, my socks are turned right side out, and a few other things that my mom beat into my head as I was growing up. The reality is, I should be doing that for my wife out of love, not because it's what I was taught to do. And I think that that maybe is an indication of the separation between where the Pharisees were with their law and where God wanted them with the relationship. And so as we enter into probably the most traditional filled time of year, I don't even want to guess how many times I'm going to hear people say in January, you know, we had a nice Christmas, but it just wasn't the same. And we know that the current regulations and everything we're doing, families aren't getting together. Part of that tradition we're going to miss. But let's not lose sight of the fact that the reason for the season behind all of this is about a relationship. It's not tradition. It's not the law. It's not the gifts. It's not a lot of the rest of that. It's that we need to focus on our relationship. Would you pray with me, please?